Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour. I'm very excited. Prateek agreed to join us, talk to us about Ford's frameworks and Toyota's theories. Every talk I've been to that Prateek has given has been very interesting, which is why I was excited to have him back. So, Prateek, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for having me. Thanks, everyone, for attending. I'm glad to see all these folks here. Um, yeah, Mark, I think Mark reached out, I don't know, was it a month ago, 2 months ago, something like that. And I was like, I'll throw a topic out, and by the 2 month mark, I'll have something. And then it was Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving went by. I'm like, I have to do this on Tuesday. I don't have anything. Well, I had the idea of what I wanted to talk about, so I have, luckily for all of us, been able to spend some time and get this thing together. But I would love to hear from everyone at the end of this how they think it went. So I'm Prateek Singh, here talking about Ford's frameworks and Toyota's theories, and also how that helps us in our day-to-day work. Full disclosure before I get started. Uh, at a post-pandemic, my family, we became a one-car family, and we currently our one car is a Ford Explorer. So we are a Ford family. That is not what I'm here to talk about, but just full disclosure, there is a little bit of skin in the game here. What I am here to talk about is this particular person, this giant of the early 20th century manufacturing. That's a picture of Henry Ford. He had some great things which helped him become that successful, and he had some not so great things as well, which some slightly distasteful things, which I would not talk about today. We're only talking about Ford in his business sense today. Um, Highly successful. Obviously, we're still driving the cars from this company that he founded in 1903. In fact, this is the timeline that I'm interested in, that I'm interested in talking about. He comes up with this company in 1903. In 1908 is when Ford introduces uh, their most famous car at that time, their most successful car at that time, which was the Model T. 1913 is when Ford first introduces the assembly line into manufacturing, into car manufacturing. And in 1914, he takes it a step further. He actually doubles everyone's pay compared to the competition. So people go into this $5 per day wage, which was double what the competition was paying. And he introduces the 8-hour workday. We'll talk a little bit more about that here as well. He makes improvements both in the way they're producing these automobiles, and in the way he is compensating people for the production of these automobiles. As a result, in 1916, a couple of things happen. One, the price of the Model T actually falls more than half. It was already the most affordable automobile on the market. It actually becomes even more affordable. The price drops more than half, and the sales, as you can see, they go up from about 20,000 per year to 600,000 per year. It's a huge jump at that point. By 1927, there's the 15 millionth Model T has been produced. It has been rolled out. In fact, in 1927, he also decides that the time is up for Model T. We're going to move on to we're going to retire that car, move on to other things. So he's set himself really well, sets himself up really well, done a lot of great things here. But he does something else that's kind of interesting in 1927. I want to ask if anyone can guess what I am talking about. Everyone's heard about this big, huge purchase that Ford made in 1927.
You talking about Fordlandia?
I am absolutely talking about Fordlandia. Whoever answered that gets 10 points. I can't tell who you are, so these fictional points are going out into the world and you all can grab them at some point. Anyway, yeah, it is Fordlandia. He goes out and purchases this big tract of land in 1927 called Fordlandia. I'll come back to Fordlandia here in a little bit. He purchased this in 1927, and I'll come back to the reasons why Ford purchased Fordlandia. Before I get to that, the more interesting bit of this, before that, well, that is actually, I think, the more interesting bit of this, but before we get to that, another interesting bit of this timeline is this particular area where Ford has introduced the assembly line to manufacturing. He has doubled people's wages. He has instituted an 8-hour workday. He's made all and made these great profits from all these sales and selling that Model T out into the world as the cheapest automobile and the most bought automobile in the world at that point. What he has done is he has developed a framework for success. He has developed this particular framework, which he can then lift and shift and apply over and over again to succeed. In fact, he uses the same thing to open another factory as time goes on. The framework, in essence, is this. Create an assembly line where machines are closer to each other so that cars can pass from machine to machine and you can maximize the space that's available. You can pay people higher wages, give them more money, so they are more likely to stay with you. They're more likely to invest in you. Change the work hours. They went from 9-hour days to 8-hour days. They went from 6-day work weeks to 5-day work weeks. It's kind of interesting that we're still stuck with the 5-day, 8-hour work week. But back then, it was revolutionary for Ford to change that. And he introduced another little thing as a part of this framework, which was this sociological department. Ford believed if I pay people well, if I set up my factories correctly, I can facilitate and I make sure that people are healthy and they're living and personal standards, personal in italics there is the emphasis, are improving. We can set up factories that will be very, very successful. This even included prohibition. This is around that same time. Ford really believed that banning alcohol and tobacco led to a great improvement in workers' lives. So setting all that up, that framework of using assembly lines, paying people well, and then taking care of them in a more sociological way, is the framework he developed that helped him be successful in creating that Model T and being so successful with Model T. Now, this is where I want to go back to Fordlandia. Fordlandia was an area in the heart of Brazil. Ford was very successful with a lot of things, but one thing where he fell behind, one thing where he wasn't very happy about, one thing, which was getting the rubber for tires. The British government, the British controlled almost all the rubber production throughout the world. They had the trees, the rubber trees were initially native to Brazil, but they had actually stolen these trees and planted them in southern Asia, where rubber was able to grow really well, and they were raising prices because they were more or less a monopoly. They were raising prices on rubber regularly. Ford wanted to control his own destiny, and in order to control his own destiny, he bought this tract of land from the Brazilian government called Fordlandia. It was in the heart of the Amazon, again, where the rubber tree came from, and it was about 2.5 million acres of land. That is larger than Yellowstone National Park. That is about 10 times the size of New York City. It was a large area. In fact, Ford wanted to go out there, plant these rubber trees, and become a vertically integrated industry where he could control everything, and he could take advantage of the fact that he was controlling everything. In fact, he wanted to go further than that. These are his own words, that he wanted to get the people in Brazil to build these things, and he did not just want to develop that land, did not just want to make money. He wanted to spread all these things that had made him successful, that he believed were the right way to live. He wanted to spread that to Brazil as well. In fact, remember the framework that I said he had developed earlier? That same framework, those same things, he actually took those exact same things and transplanted them directly into Brazil. He used the same assembly line philosophy of planting these trees close to each other, so he could plant more and more trees to get rubber. He almost doubled the prevailing wage for workers who came to work for him. There was no sense of a workday. He introduced the 8-hour workday. He brought in the managers from America, from the US, who had been successful at managing his plants. He brought in all those same folks to help manage Fordlandia, and he really went hard on the sociological department thing. He built American style houses, schools. There was even a golf course there. He prohibited alcohol and tobacco. There was a cafeteria serving American food. All the stuff, time clocks, poetry readings. He essentially wanted to take the Midwest and transplant it directly into Brazil. That not only did he develop this framework that worked really well, he took that same framework and tried to transplant it into Brazil. In fact, if you go out there, you'll find old pictures and even today's pictures of Fordlandia. Top left is the school. There's the hospital. There's the houses there for people to live in, which at that time looked a lot like what housing looked like in the Midwest. He essentially tried to create. Tried to take Dearborn, Michigan, pick it up, and just put it right in Brazil, in Fordlandia. I think we already had a couple of people mention this. When the rubber met the road, pun intended, this was a disaster. This really was a disaster. There were lots of things that went wrong, and I would, if this interests you, I would highly recommend going out there and looking up the podcasts around Fordlandia, and they'll detail all the things that went wrong. These are just a few of these things that happened. When rubber trees are planted so close to each other, it becomes very easy for what's called tree blight, which is the major parasite that kills rubber trees, to jump from one tree to another because their leaves touch. Even other parasites, it becomes very easy for them to travel. So that by itself started causing problems. The heat and humidity of the rainforest made 8-hour work days grueling. What the rubber plantation workers were initially used to before Ford got there was getting up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. when it's nice and cool before it gets too hot, tapping the trees and then leaving and then coming back later and grabbing the sap. The 8-hour workday did not quite make sense to them. All the stuff that Ford brought in, all the IDs and everything, it was very foreign to the workers, and there were full-scale riots. Like the workers revolted. There were full-scale riots, and at some point, even the Brazilian army had to come in to quell things down. And Ford hadn't realized this, but the land he was going into, the area he was going into, was pretty hilly and rocky and infertile, and it just did not lend itself that well to do what what Ford wanted to do. And over and over again, they kept hitting more and more hurdles. There is a book um, by sorry, I'm not able to move this forward. There's a book by a person named Greg Grandin, and I'll talk about him here in a little bit too. Um, he actually goes in and he talks about the entire history, the rise and fall of Fordlandia. The Ford Motor Company eventually ends up selling this all back to the Brazilian government after they've lost over $20 million. And another interesting little tidbit on this: Henry Ford never visited any of these cities. They also created another city about 40 miles downriver, which after Fordlandia had terribly failed to salvage something, but even that did not work out the way he expected to. This was around 1945 that all of this fell apart. Around 1945 is when another big thing happened, which was the end of World War II, and around that same time, um, you know, Toyota started thinking about how they could do better. So they actually visited Ford's plants, not in Brazil, but in Michigan. Um, and they saw that while Ford was producing about 8,000 cars per day, meanwhile Toyota was only producing 2,500 cars per day. So they wanted to see this framework, this style that Ford was working in, to figure out what they could learn from it. And what they learned from it, what's interesting is Taiichi Ono, who's the chief engineer of the Toyota production system, what he learned from it is he couldn't do the things that Ford was doing. There were some things he could do, that we could set up that assembly line, but for the most part, they realized that they could not do the things that Ford was doing. They realized they needed to do something better. Japan had just lost the war. They're in a much smaller set of islands. They cannot do all the same thing that Ford was doing, and they started their journey towards this more leaner method, and again, pun intended, called the Toyota production system. That Toyota production system over time came to be known as Lean. There are some interesting things about Lean which are relevant for us to talk about right now, and we'll talk about that quite a bit here. Lean really has no established framework for a lean transformation. There aren't like all these sets of rules that you follow and you become lean. Lean does not have a diagram, a detailed diagram that you have to check off all the boxes in order to become lean. They're usually just principles. Principles that are context dependent. In their book, The Machine That Changed the World, Womack and Jones actually lay out, here are the 5 things that you do that make you lean. They don't say how you do it. They say you do these 5 things and you're lean. A much simpler way. I know that's a lot of words. You don't need to read through all that. A much simpler way to represent that is this simple loop where you essentially identify what creates value, you map how things become value, you create flow across that value stream, you establish a pull system where you only work on things when they get requested, and you seek perfection. You seek to improve this, and you keep going in this loop as you keep getting better and better and better. You iterate through this to keep getting better, to keep the product you're creating, make that better, the process you're using, make that better. There aren't a lot of well-defined rules. There aren't a lot of recipes to this. As long as you're doing this, you are in a lean system. Some of you, since this is an Agile Lunch and Learn, have probably already noticed how this same idea is essentially Agile. This is exactly what Agile itself is. In fact, the essence of Agile is lean. That is where Agile comes from. Lean comes from that Toyota production system after discovering what Ford was up to, and they saw they couldn't do that, and that's where Agile comes from that Toyota production system. In fact, now that we're talking about that again, why did you? So we talked. I talked in detail about Fordlandia failing. Someone's already trying to answer this question, but why did Fordlandia fail? I see Michael's comment of Ford did not study the culture and the location and was only looking at money and profit, and his framework could not work. Any other? That's absolutely true. What else? What else do you think happened there? Why did Fordlandia fail? Too hot? Yeah, absolutely true. Too hot. Copying the wrong thing. Yeah. Perhaps it didn't adapt as they discovered. Yep, absolutely. Inability to adapt. Great. You all are already on the track I wanted to put you on. Yeah, Ford was also trying to recreate supply chain network that didn't work. Absolutely. Yep. So this absolutely, you're all saying all the right things there. In essence, Ford had a recipe. He knew, regardless of culture, context, people, everything you all are mentioning, he was trying to implement this recipe. And as you all mentioned, yeah, there was that did not have a lot of flexibility. We were just going forward, applying this framework as he had learned, as they prescribed, and just going forward with it. That was the big reason why Fordlandia failed. In fact, I talked about Greg Grandin earlier. His book this is his interview with NPR, and he says the first failure of Fordlandia was social. First failure of Fordlandia was exactly that. It was we did not understand what needed to happen, how the social context changed the framework that you were trying to adapt to. My favorite line in this is that not one drop of latex from Fordlandia ever made it to a Ford car. As someone's mentioning, it's absolutely they tried to follow the concept of one size fits all, and that was absolutely not the right way to go about it. That is true for all prescriptive transformations. Recipes are great for Thanksgiving dinner, and everyone who celebrates Thanksgiving, I'm hoping you had a great Thanksgiving dinner. But they're not great for change. They're not large frameworks by themselves carry large risks. Ford ended up spending $20 million on this thing. He ended up saying, this is a large framework that I can just lift and shift and apply. And when you're doing that, you are putting in a huge bet. You're saying, if all this comes together perfectly, this will be great. That is a huge risk. That's a huge investment that could all fall apart. In fact, if I change that question of why did Fordlandia fail, and you all are already headed in this direction, if I change this description, the question from why did Fordlandia fail to why do Agile transformation fail, really, at least my answer, and this is in most cases, not in all cases, nothing's 100%, we become focused on the recipe rather than the mindset. We should be focused on the mindset of why we're going towards Agile, on why we're trying to do things, rather than let's try to tick every box. This is purely my opinion. The best approach to implementing Agile is Agile. Let's make these small changes and find out, are we heading in the right direction? Are we actually making a difference? Rather than knowing upfront exactly everything that is going to work and trying to do it. Agile is about discovering what works best, not knowing what works best. We want to move forward and figure out what works best in our context. What are the things that eliminate waste in our context? Rather than knowing upfront, we do all these things and we will be Agile and we will do things well. Agile is about going towards something like that circle from Lean. Obviously, it's not a recipe, which also means it's not easy, which means we have to use our own brains as we try to do this. Recipes make it very easy because they're all there and you don't have to think about things. But when you are working in your own context, you have to think about these things and not just simply follow a recipe if you want the best results. In fact, the reason I say that circle of lean uh, is not a recipe is because this particular implementation, this is asking you to break the rules in the pursuit of value, flow, and perfection, not follow the rules. Like, we're encouraging you to actually break the rules that people have told you to follow in order to get better at delivering value, at flow, and at perfecting your product and your process. Not just simply follow those rules. If your agile implementation is such where everything is already fixed on the things that you're going to do, if it has a roadmap, it is probably not the right way to go. And again, I know it is very easy to sit here and bash safe. It's an easy thing to do, but they make it easy. The the idea really is you don't, just like developing your product, you don't know from your till you get in front of a customer where you should go. Similarly, for your agile transformation, you probably don't know what the next right step is before you actually start putting these things in practice. There's no way you can know an entire roadmap of it. And this applies to all agile implementations. It's not just safe. It's pretty much everything. This is my attempt at copying the Agile Manifesto here. While we value the things on the right, we find a lot more value in the things on the left. Mindset over recipes, principles over frameworks, being agile over following a mindset, and eliminating waste over adding processes. Removing things often works better than adding things. In fact, there's an old way. I forget the philosopher whose words these are. It's an old Latin. I think it's Seneca, and he talks about making progress via negativa, by removing things. Prefer making progress by removing things rather than adding what we might think is necessary. There's the best quote I could find around this is from Michelangelo to say, the sculpture is already there. He just has to remove the things, the superfluous stuff. That is where we want to be. We want to be a place where we can remove things so things get better, get things out of people's way of getting work done. I worked at a company for a long time with a lot of wonderful people, and we kind of did something similar to. We kind of made progress via negativa by removing things. And credit to everyone who was involved in this transformation as we did this. This is back in 2005. We were a Scrum shop, and we had all these teams that were cross-functional teams of 6 to 10 people responsible for functional areas. The company was doing really well, so we grew really quickly. We went from 10 to 30 teams very quickly, and by the time I left that place, I think we were up to about 80 different teams. And when you grow that fast, the thing that comes in your way is all these dependencies. Team A is dependent on Team B, and then Team B is dependent on Team C. At that point, when it came to scaling, at least, none of these things existed. Less, safe, dad, none of these things existed at that point of time. We had to figure out ourselves how we could make progress without any of these recipes becoming available. Now, this is where we went to make progress via negativa. We had all these walls between these teams. We removed all those walls. Instead of having teams that were 6 to 10 people, we started having teams that were up to 30 people. At some point, I remember leading a team of about 35, 40 people. We broke those rules. We were like, the problem is dependencies. Why not just make these people one team so the dependencies are just gone, and let them self-manage and figure out how things work. We removed these walls and we believe made things better. In fact, we went further than that. We stopped sprinting. We went to more of a continuous flow system. We did not do sprint planning anymore. We came up with a completely different way of doing planning. In fact, we still did a bunch of Scrum things, including a daily stand-up, but we didn't do the 3 questions anymore. We went to a completely different way of doing that. Things that worked for us over time, as we looked at that, looked at the way things were going and how we could make things better, we went to all these different ways of working that helped us get better. In fact, this is a Kanban board for one of the teams that I used to work on, and all the elements of that lean circle are on this board. All those blue cards are the individual items of value. The value stream is mapped. The flow was from left to right on this. We had WIP limits that allowed us to create a pull system. And then we retrospected regularly to figure out how to make this thing better and better. There's a question on the chat. What was your stand-up agenda after you moved away from 3 questions? I'll answer that really quickly. Really, our agenda was which of the things on this board are currently taking longer than we expect them to take. It's very hard to see in this picture, but each of those cards, I don't think I can zoom in, but I can. If you look right below over here, there are these ticks on these cards, and we would tick the card every day. And when a card went into the second row of those ticks, we're like, okay, this thing is taking way too long. What do we need to do to get this thing going? How do we get this thing flowing? Literally, our stand-up was, how do we as a team come together to make sure everything on this board is flowing the way we expect it to flow? So it was more around creating that flow that our stand-ups were. Cool. So yeah, so we did a bunch of these things where we removed processes to make things better. We focused a lot more on our flow than we did on anything else. I don't know how to take away annotations. Ooh, eraser, found it. Great. All right, so Fordlandia, back to Fordlandia. This was the problem with Fordlandia. There was at least a problem with Fordlandia, which was, and I need to get back to this. A problem with Fordlandia was using a recipe. Ford had a recipe, he picked it up, lifted and shifted it. That was a problem. But in my opinion, the problem with Fordlandia was sticking with the recipe. Once we realized this wasn't working, and some of you mentioned this in the chat as well, once we realized it wasn't working, it's our job to start changing it. Let's figure out what are the rules that need to be broken in order to make this thing work for us. If parts of a framework or a recipe do not work in your context, remove them, change them. And also, this is where I'll get a little more provocative here. If a framework or recipe falls apart when you change it, well, it might not be agile enough. It just might not be, it might just be the wrong approach. And someone mentioned inspect and adapt. Inspect and adapt is not just for your product. It's also for your process. It's also to figure out what works for you best. It's also uncovering better ways of developing software, to quote the Agile Manifesto once again there. Recipes are there as a starting point, not as an ending point. More often than not, you will need to change things, and you might not need the entire recipe at times. You could probably just grab elements from it. In fact, as I mentioned before, I keep getting into this. There we are. Agile is more about discovering what works best in your context, not knowing what works best. As we make progress, let's look at how we're doing. Are we able to satisfy our customers? Are we able to eliminate waste from our process? As we do, if wherever we are failing to do those things, let's experiment. Yeah, as Mark mentions there in the chat, recipe is a reasonable thing to try first. But yeah, since if you have evidence that it doesn't work, let's change it. Yeah, Shuhari. I think that's been mentioned about 5 times in the chat already. Exactly. But yeah, this is the main message I wanted to drive through today, which is to say, don't stick with, just because someone's prescribed something, don't stick with it. Your context is so different. Brazil is very different from Michigan. What works in Michigan is not always going to work in Brazil. So whenever you see things where someone's selling you a wholesale big huge framework transformation, well, be agile about it. Do the small thing, figure out what's working, and then do the next thing, as opposed to trying to do a big wholesale thing. Finally, to wrap up, a whole bunch of references. I will send a copy of this to Mark so he can share it. Whole bunch of references from where I pulled a bunch of this information. As I said again, if you go to your favorite podcasting app and just search for Fordlandia, you will hear a whole bunch of things there. And if you want to hear more of these similar kind of stories, or just general thoughts about Agile, especially from two drunk people, there is our YouTube channel with Dan Vikanti and Nisha, who's in the background there, in case you all missed her earlier, and me. The three of us have an Agile called Drunk channel called Drunk Agile. And you feel free to jump on there and look through the things that we've talked about. For more, prokanban.org. And my website is datadrivenagile.com. I have a bunch of classes coming up if anyone's interested in all that fun stuff. I will not sell you a huge framework, I can assure you of that. And finally, thank you everyone for sticking with it and for listening to me rave and rant about frameworks and Ford and Toyota.
Prateek, that was great. So does anyone have any questions? If you want to either type in the chat or come off. We've got a request for the PowerPoint. Is that something you can post and we can send out a link to everyone? I'll try to get those links in sent out that were mentioned as well.
Really?
So anybody have any questions for Prateek? So I've got a question. One thing you were mentioning of focusing on the tickets that were had the most tick marks on them. Yeah. Was that just kind of the process? You'd all gather around the board and say, okay, which one of these things is impeding our flow, and then start with that?
Pretty much, yeah. We would usually, before we had electronic tools that helped us with this, we would go right to left on the board and say, is there anything in this column that looks like it's aged too much? No? Okay, what about the next column?
Okay.
Something here too much? Oh, this one. Let's talk about this. Often we would even have people before the stand-up kind of go and put like a pink sticky on one of them to say, this one is blocked. So we'll talk about the ones that were blocked as well. So yeah, essentially what you said, Mark, like which of these are really not flowing or impeding our flow? What do we do about them?
Okay, cool. Very cool. Any other questions anyone have? Feel free to just come off mute if you want to talk, or type it in the chat and I can read it.
Lots of thank you. So very welcome, folks. I mean, I'll definitely get the slides to Mark so we can share them. But yeah, if anyone has any questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Paul. Hey, I just wanted to ask, because I work in a hardware and mix between software companies. Could you say that if a rainfall, framework works in that company, would you recommend not to change it because they say it works, or would you still push that Agile has to be pushed just because it's something like the trend right now?
Yeah, I would say if it works, you don't have to change it. But again, I go back to that diagram of lean to go, it's working great. What can I change here to make it better? I would rather look at if there's some customers that are unhappy, or if there is a lot of waste in the system, how do I remove that? As opposed to, let me change this over to this completely different thing. The Via Negativa thing of how do we pursue perfection is what I would recommend, more than, hey, let's go flip this whole thing over just because we want to.
So
This
that,
is Anthony. Were there any downsides of having a large 30-person team for communication and that kind of thing? What did you experience?
Um, I thought there would be. I remember when we first, because I was a part of a team that got combined with two other teams to become this large team. And initially I thought there would be. And first, I would say this, the only downside was the culture shock we felt in the first 3 to 6 months. It was really weird to all of a sudden be a part of this large team when you had formed these small teams, which were tight-knit groups.
Right.
Once we got past that, once we started focusing on flow of work, uh, it seemed to work really well because the communication became more about the work items and it was centered on those cards. And because we were limiting WIP on cards, we were working on a very few things at the same time. It was very easy for everyone to be aware of everything that's going on because those two things combined, the fact that the communication was about the work, and two, there was not a lot of work active at any given point of time, helped us really stay in communication very easily once we got over the shock over the culture shock. Yeah.
Thank you. And one quick follow-up. Did you guys do periodic retrospectives, and did you do it
Yes.
for the big team like that?
We did periodic retrospectives. We at some point we even changed the cadence of retrospectives from being periodic to being just in time.
Oh, wow. Nice.
We got to the point when if something went horribly wrong, instead of waiting a couple of weeks to talk about it, we would bring together the people who were involved in it and we'll talk about it and then share it out with the team. And then we extended our periodic retrospectives to be longer, so not longer, the cadence for it to be longer, so that we could then talk about all the things that we had done in before in our just-in-time retrospectives.
Nice.
Do you have any techniques for running large group retrospectives, since you said that there were 30 people in there? And I would like to know if there are some techniques that you used.
I don't think I have any good ones. The thing that for me, everything comes down to small batches and limiting WIP, and that's why those just-in-time retrospectives work really well for us. We would literally bring together, if let's say one story took 30 days when everything usually gets done in 10 days, the folks that were working on that story, the 4 or 5 people who had touched it, would get together, talk about what can we learn from this, how can we make this better next time, and then in a couple of weeks or a month, whenever we had the big team retrospective, we would actually share that all out. So what happened with that was, because these small groups were meeting more often in small batches and we were collecting this information, we did not need to have 2-3 hour long retrospectives when the whole team got together. It was more of a share out session of these are the things that we have learned over the last couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Someone's asking me about swarming. Yes, we swarmed quite a bit. We definitely swarmed quite a bit. It wasn't, the advantage of swarming for us was that more people were aware of the problems that we were seeing, and it paid off later, because then we would have, when we had the time to bring in more technical work, our developers would know where we needed to go concentrate for refactoring efforts. The swarming for us was also a lot around testing. We used to swarm on testing quite a bit, and that because it over and over seemed like testing would fall behind, so we would swarm on testing quite a bit for sure. Yeah.
So does it mean that in the 30 people team, every day, does every individual have a ticket, or you meant to say only maybe 10 tickets? Do you remember what that was?
I don't think we ever got to the point that we only had 10 tickets, but I would say that in the last team that I can think of with 35 people at any point of time, I would say there were probably 18 to 20 tickets active. I would have loved to have gotten to the point where we were down to 10 tickets, but it was 18 to 20 tickets was, I think, the best we got to on that team. Another team I was on with 16, 17 people at any point of time, there were 10 tickets active. So there was always some sort of pairing or swarming going on. A lot of cross-functional pairing, a lot of QA and dev, or BA and QA pairing on things.
Got it. That's very helpful. Thanks for sharing.
No.
And particularly, it wasn't that you had 35 developers, right? Those
Right.
35 of from all different. Okay.
Yeah, it was cross-functional. It was devs, QA, BAs, UX folks. That was the entire team. I did not mention this earlier, but there is an InfoQ article. I will have to find it's called Ultimate Kanban, Scaling Without Frameworks, on InfoQ. I'll have to find the link for it, which describes the journey of that of that organization. Yep, that one exactly. Scaling agile, scaling without frameworks.
Any other questions here?
Prateek, I just wanted to find out, with the team where you had this quite a large squad, did you ever have a time when you would have smaller pods work on a specific feature?
Yeah. First of all, hi Naman, how you doing?
Good in yourself.
Long time no see.
It's been a while.
And yeah, we absolutely did. We absolutely did this thing of there were, and let me actually go further out. This large organization had multiple of these 20, 30 people teams, and each team kind of figured out what works best for them as well. The teams that I worked closely with, some of them did this thing where they broke themselves up into cells that would change often every week or every couple of weeks. For this week, or after every feature, sorry. In this feature, these 6 people are working together, these 8 people are working together, and if someone needs help, they would jump around. Other teams had the idea of our overall feature whip is just 3 features, and these 3 people lead feature 1, these 3 people lead feature 2, these 3 lead feature 3. They will stay static. Everyone else will float between all these features and help everyone out. So every team kind of came up with their own model of how to reduce cycle time, essentially, how to get value to customers as quickly as possible. And every team tried to figure out what would be the best approach to do that.
Okay. And you mentioned swarming. So was it quite successful having the developers, for instance, assist with testing? Because I know that sometimes, there can be a slower speed when developers do test, and you also may be biased towards your own code. How successful was that exercise?
Yeah, I think most teams stuck to a rule of you don't test your own code, but then I do know some teams broke that rule as well. But it was very often you as a developer going to help someone test someone else's code, and you were what that helped for us at least was developers became more and more adept at writing automated tests. That's essentially what they would do, because you put a developer in front of a test script and go click here, then click here, then click here. What the developer eventually gets to is, why can't I just automate this instead of me having to do this every time? And that is what it helped us with. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I think that's an interesting point about the idea that if you have the developers testing, it will slow things down. I guess on some of the teams I've worked with, if the people that normally do the testing are all busy and you're able to increase your flow by having developer help get something done, it really speeds things up from the perspective of how much were we able to deliver to the customer, even though if it feels like you're slowing down because they weren't working on code.
Yeah.
Very true. That's a good point, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that on the Mark, you're hitting on the third and the fourth thing in the lean circle of establish flow, and then work on a pull system. Because if you're pulling in new work because things are stuck downstream, you're actually making this worse, not making it better. You establish flow so that you can pull when you have capacity to pull.
Any other thoughts or questions or comments?
Yeah, quick one. Can you talk about the management culture that enabled this kind of experimentation?
I see a name on the screen that I would credit with most of this management culture, which helped a lot. Steve Reed's name is there. I'm guessing it's the same Steve Reed that I used to work for, and Steve definitely bought into this as the VP of engineering and enabled all of us to go experiment with this and to go focus on the flow metrics over following recipes and figure out how we could make sure things were flowing to our customers and do whatever we needed to do in order to reduce those cycle times and get things flowing. So I'd credit Steve with the management culture. It definitely made us more and more data driven, to the point of our data should be supporting what we want to do for our customers, and we bought into it. So yeah.
I think we need to have a talk with Steve. That's probably the real special sauce we need to
Yep.
learn.
Absolutely. Steve is the co-author of that study as well. So the InfoQ article. Steve and Dan Vikanti and I, three of us, are the co-authors of that. So.
Any other questions? Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. Prateek, thank you so much. And yeah, send me links to anything. I'll send everybody an email, and that way anything that, because the chat will go away. That way we can make sure everybody gets anything to your stuff and everything you think people might be interested in. But thank you so much. Everybody have a great day. And coming up next week, we're going to be talking about Agile roadmaps. Including, I think this is the one with the giant chicken. So Agile roadmaps is what we're going to be talking about here coming up next week. So hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and thanks again, Prateek.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Prateek. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.